Hi everyone, this is Mayan Writes. I'm Mayan. I talk all about writing and storytelling. Today I talk about world building, and I'm going to focus on all the realistic genres. So world building that doesn't have anything to do with sci-fi, fantasy, or dystopian. The reason I do this is I think that we sometimes miss how world building can be very, very strong, even if we talk about quote unquote the real world. Because there's so many subtleties there about in communities and societies, and there's a lot you can take and then project onto those other unrealistic genres. I see world building not as setting design, but as conflict design. I wrote about it in my writing guide that a world building and a world can present great opposition to the hero, and then it kind of creates an organic conflict. And to me, that's the greatest source of conflict, as opposed to like a coincidence or an accident that isn't really organic. This is a true strength of good world building to me. And the more a conflict is organic, the smarter the writing, and the more satisfying the impact. For example, in one of my favorite shows, Episodes, the story is about two English writers coming to Hollywood to adapt their beloved British show to an American audience. That's a great premise because you can see the conflict right then and there. They're English and they're coming to America and they have to adapt their screenplay. Since they're English and unfamiliar with both the American ways and specifically the way Hollywood works, maintaining personal relationships and the show business in general, this is the story world that creates so much of the conflict and the comedy. Of course, there are opponents within the show. There are executives, actors, and other writers that create conflict for them, but they all belong in this unfamiliar world, and they all follow this certain guideline that the world dictates. And this is where the world building really enters. What is the world building in Hollywood according to the show? The most important thing is they want to make money. That's the first thing on everyone's list. And in the world of television shows, where the hero work, that's translated specifically to ratings. Why is this a big deal? In the UK, where they come from, money is a motive, yes, but not as big, because there isn't big money in UK TV. There aren't millionaires like actors and producers in Hollywood. So there isn't the same amount of people watching. So you could argue it's a cultural thing as well. We're not getting into this, but the point is that the money dictates things, and our heroes aren't used to it. What they want to do is make good TV, right? Their motive is to write something good. But here in Hollywood, the only interest is to make something that would appeal to as many people as possible because ratings. So they have to rewrite the show to make it dumber. They have to get a star to play the lead. They get Matt LeBlanc, who was totally wrong for the show, but they're forced to cast him. And they change plot lines, they change characters, and this keeps happening again and again until they have an entirely different show and that they hate and that eventually fails. But it's so organic that it makes sense that those ridiculous things that happen aren't surprising because they all come from that same inherent guideline of that world, of chasing after the money and the rating. This explains other things that don't have anything to do directly with money, like, for example, actors getting plastic surgery that destroys their faces because they need to look young to get cast, or producers having affairs but not leaving their wives because they can't afford it financially. It's all airtight. Everything comes down to that one bottom line. The world that's created is really holistic in terms of everything stems from the same thing. So I think the takeaway here is, what's your world's bottom line? Another example is Shameless. So in Shameless, the American version, the Chicago South Side, which is the world, is designed as a place where you live day to day, always in survival mode, and that affects how people grow up, how they make decisions, how they see the future, what mechanisms of self-destruction they have, how shameless they are. That's the bottom line, and everything stems from that. The poverty, the resourcefulness, the lack of adult supervision, the petty crime, the lack of opportunity. And this really speaks to the theme. The theme of the show is family and how sticking together with your own people is the best way to survive at any circumstance. With Episodes, the theme is the cultural difference and how you can, bridge that gap. So the second point I take from this is how it relates to theme and how it builds on the theme. This brings up an interesting brainstorming question about the world, and that is, what happens when an outsider comes in? This can really help open up some creative ideas for plot points. especially in Shameless, because the difference between the South Side and people coming from the outside is so vast. It's so great. And to bridge that gap, creates so many opportunities for both comedy and drama. So Shameless opens the first episode of the first season with Fiona, the head of the family, that is taking care of her 5 siblings without any help from anyone. She meets this new guy that comes into her world, learning what it is to live on the South Side. And that's kind of spirals and start this chain reaction because she learns about his world, he learns about her world, and that creates a lot of friction. And we like friction. Friction is great for drama, it's great for story. The other thing about world building is that it can really dictate what your character arc needs to be. Your hero is going to be the only person who can step up in this world, who can really shine. He needs to present an opposition to the world, just like the world will present an opposition to your main character. Otherwise, why him? Why specifically that main character? Why is he the hero? Now, this doesn't happen in every story, but it's a great storytelling tool. For example, in Episodes, the 2 writers, Sean and Beverly, so they're a married couple, they both come to Hollywood together, and that world, like I said, presents this opposition on them, and the way that they react really shows who the character are. Right? So Beverly is very against Hollywood. She's against everything that's fake. She's against the money. She's against the kind of shiny filters that everyone puts on. And Sean is actually very fascinated with this world. He's very interested and curious to see what it can offer him. The reaction to their world actually creates the friction between these 2 characters that started off as a team and then start drifting apart once this world kind of like shows what their values are, because it forces them to reevaluate their priorities and what's really important to them. Of course, I'm going to spoil this show as well. So in the second season, what happens is they've drifted apart so much that they actually separate. And they decide to no longer stay together in the second season. So this shows how the world really affects not just the individual, but the dynamics of the people, around. Let's talk about Sean and Beverly's arc. So we said that the hero needs to be the one that steps up in this world. And of course, Sean and Beverly, as the quote-unquote only English writers in Hollywood, are the ones that stand out, right? They bring something that no one else brings because they are very honest, they're very, blunt, and they live in a world, they come into a world that is Hollywood, that is very fake and is very ambiguous, that has a lot of masks and filters. So of course, they're the ones to shine in this world. They're the ones who can maybe bring some change, but also be affected by that world. So it's kind of like a relationship that is a dynamic relationship. You affect, but you're also affected. So what happens in the end is, throughout the 4 or 5 seasons, they present so much resistance, right? There is so much resistance. They try to make Hollywood work with them, but they can't because they can't control this world. And they let it change them, of course, but they manage to somehow get back to what's really important. They manage to get back together. They manage to really focus on what's important to them, and they end up writing a show about their own experience, which is turning into a gimmick lately, but this show is kind of older, so it wasn't a gimmick back then. So they write a show about 2 English writers coming to Hollywood and trying to write this story. And I think that it's a perfect arc because they understood that there is a gap that needs to be bridged, but it's okay that they kind of merge together, that they're kind of affected by that world. And yes, there were fish out of water, but they kind of managed their way in there because, yes, they managed to write a successful show. So I think it wasn't a story about 2 cultures meeting and clashing. It was about merging. And that was my interpretation anyway, and I loved it. I thought it was very well done. Okay, I'm going to do a quick summary here because I said a lot of things and I'm not sure it was super coherent. So we said there's a guideline, right? A certain rule that dictates everything. It makes a lot of sense to me that it's about what's important to everyone, kind of like the core value of the entire society that everyone is aligned with, that sets priority. And the second thing is the character design and the character arc and how the world building can really help model that. So these are the 2 main things. We talked about the brainstorming question of what happens when an outsider comes in, what happens maybe when the hero steps out, and then how can that world create the greatest opposition to your hero, and how can your hero step up? What does your hero has that makes him the perfect one to stand out in this world? This is a very complicated thing. I'll probably do another episode on this. I just find world building super fascinating when it's really clear and it's when it's in literary fiction or, genres like rom-com or drama that it's like realistic. I'd love to hear your opinions. You can always reach out on all my channels. I'm most active on Instagram. I hope you enjoyed it and that it helped. And in the meantime, happy writing.